Before I start my presentation, I want to ask you one question. Does anybody believe in a miracle?
Yes.
Okay, I guess only one person believes in a miracle. So some of you may believe in a miracle, and while some of you don't. However, I believe in miracle, and because when I researched this topic, I felt this can only be explained by miracle. Hello, my name is Sergeant Moon, and today I'm going to talk about Apollo 13 accident. So, in April 11th, 1970, in Kennedy Space Center, one spaceship was launched. It was called Apollo 13 with 3 astronauts: James Lowell, Fred Hayes, and Jake Swigert. After almost 55 hours of their flight, second oxygen tank exploded, which damaged a lot of spacecraft. So the reason why the oxygen tank exploded was basically because of a fan and heater NASA placed in the tank. The reason they placed the fan and heater was because the oxygen tank is exposed to extremely cold temperature of space. So the gas precipitates and it basically forms a layer, which makes NASA can't actually know how much exact oxygen is left in the spacecraft. So they placed fan and a heater so they could heat the oxygen tank up and stir it at the same time, which basically solved this problem. However, in this time, when astronauts activated the fan, it suddenly exploded, and the explosion of second oxygen tank even damaged the first one and the insulators and pipes surrounding it. At first, they didn't actually notice that the oxygen tank exploded, and they only thought it's kind of a meteor crash or something. However, when James Lowell looked back, he noticed that white vapors and gas are coming out of the oxygen tank, and he said, this is basically what fan looked like, and he said a famous quote called, "Houston, we've had a problem," to NASA. So I got an actual voice for this. Well,
Okay, we had a problem here. This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we had a problem.
so this was an actual conversation with Houston and James Lowell, and now the MCC Mission Control Center in NASA Houston had to decide how the Apollo 13, which had a massive explosion, comes back safely to the Earth. There were basically 2 options. First, the just U-turning from the accident spot, or secondly, swing by the moon. So swing by means changing path of a spacecraft using gravity of a celestial body. So in this case, the spacecraft is Apollo 13, and gravity of a celestial body is moon gravity. Now MCC had to decide this very carefully because on the former option, they didn't have that much power to just U-turn and come back to Earth safely. And in the latter option, astronauts didn't have this life supporting devices to that long to come back to Earth safely. So MCC decided the latter option because they decided this is more safer for the astronauts. And MCC's Gene Kranz made a very famous quote called "Failure is not an option," deciding how Apollo 13 comes back to the Earth. Now, as the oxygen tank of the service module was exploded, so there wasn't that much oxygen in the in the main module, so astronauts moved to Aquarius, which is lunar module, which had pretty much oxygen. But the problem was with carbon dioxide, because lunar module is, at first, it's planned and it's made for 2 people, so it's only made to remove two people's carbon dioxide. But now there's 3 people, so it had to remove 3 people's carbon dioxide, which is kind of impossible. So the problem was high CO2 level. So the astronauts had to make emergency CO2 remover which looked like this, with duct tape, their socks, and the manual cover, which was probably thick. Now, during their way back to the Earth, they had to revise orbit several times. Now, there was 2 reasons. Firstly, the leftover oxygen from the explosion was boiling, and secondly, and most importantly, the insulators, which was bursted from the explosion, was reflecting sunlight everywhere, which made Apollo 13 can't navigate its path normally, because the way Apollo 13 navigates its path was it gets sunlight and it calculates the distance between Earth and the spacecraft, and it finds its safest path to the Earth. But because of insulators reflecting sunlight everywhere, it could not actually calculate the path properly, so the crew had to revise its orbit several times during its way back to the Earth. However, the problem was that because astronauts couldn't sleep or drink water or rest for a few days, and later they couldn't even recognize their own handwriting, so Houston had to give them full calculated number so they could return safely back to the Earth. So recovering all these hardships, Apollo 13 gets its way back to the Earth's atmosphere on April 17th, and they had to move back to the main module and separate Aquarius and the service module. Now, the astronauts said it was very sad when they separated Aquarius, because they went through many hardships and in this Aquarius module. So there was also a problem when they separated Aquarius. So Aquarius was originally planned to be separated right after they researched the moon. So it has to be separated on the moon's atmosphere. So there should be a distance between those 2, so they don't crash while the Apollo 13 powers up to the Earth. But in this case, there was no distance between those 2, so NASA had to work with that one. And the solution for that problem was that, so they higher up the air pressure in the Aquarius. So the way it works is just like when you release a balloon, it powers off because of the air inside. Finally, on 1970, April 17th, 17:41 p.m., Apollo 13 safely landed on the Pacific Ocean. Now, this picture is it was filmed by astronauts when they separated off the service module. As you can see, this part was taken off by the explosion, and you can see you can see it's very big, and it's almost like a quarter of service module. Now, they landed on the Pacific Ocean, as you can see, and near the Samoa Island, and they were rescued by the Navy. And this is a picture of MCC crews. Now, President Nixon later called it a successful failure because they learned a lot from. They had really big lesson about safety of space exploring. So the reasons of this accident was firstly component supplier, secondly course of supply, which was very weird. They did not actually report the accident that happened during they were moving the supply. And lastly, careless safety procedure of Kennedy Space Center was its last reason. However, these problems wasn't actually fixed right after Apollo 13, so it led to the most miserable accident in the space exploration history, called the Challenger's disaster. Before I move on to quiz, does anybody have a question about my presentation? Okay, now, firstly, which part of Apollo 13 which part of Apollo 13 exploded?
Oxygen.
Yes, the second oxygen tank exploded, and secondly, why did Apollo 13 accident happen?
Oxygen.
As you can see in this slide, reasons of accidents were component supplier's mistake, weird course of supply, and careless safety procedure of Kennedy Space. Before I end my presentation, I want to introduce to you James Lovell's famous quote called, "From now on, we'll live in a world where man has walked on the moon. It's not a miracle, we just decided to go." Thank you for listening.